Okay, so welcome. Today we have Adam. This is part of our CSF series. Welcome, Adam. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you interested in the cerebrospinal fluid, or what sort of practices opened you up to this fluid in your body.
Thanks, Mauro, and thanks for having me on. It's been look, it's been an interesting experience, but everything that I've experienced lately has been the result of some deep, slow, rhythmic nasal breathing, um, whereby I had a very interesting shift about 2 years ago now, but I've been practicing the breath or a rhythmic breath for about 4 years now. I think it's about 12 or 1300 days straight. Started with an hour, probably upwards of about 4 hours a day. Some days now that I've become probably partially addicted, I'd have to say. And it's not the breath that's made me addicted, it's the resulting of the rhythmic breathing. So I think it was 22 months ago, nearly 2 years ago now, and I have heard you mention this on one of your previous podcasts, that the breath flips at times and then the breath breathes you. And I feel like that's the experience that I've had. So yeah, back some time ago, I started off, doing a little bit of Wim Hof stuff and doing some holotropic breathing. And admittedly, I was probably looking for that little bit of a high and getting that fuzzy, fuzzy feeling in that pineal pituitary area and a few nice colours and things like that. But so I persisted and wanted to emulate that as much as possible. And um, I keep myself healthy. I've got a personal training background in the last 15 to 20 years. I've done a little bit of a merry-go-round, and, from the fitness and strength side of things to the recovery to fascial release. But it seems to go on full circle, and I've come to understand that the number one pillar to health is the breath and nasal breathing in particular. So slowing that breath down to, 4, 3, 2.5, 2 breaths a minute. I've now designed a breath practice called progressive breathing, whereby you build up the strength in the respiratory system, diaphragm, abdominal wall, and pelvic floor. I've refined a technique, which has its roots in some ancient qigong, Taoism, some yogic and Vedic stuff, some Kundalini, trying to really pull that life force energy back up the spine, and had some amazing results. So I guess, just going back to the flipping of the breath, about 22 months ago now. I used to do some breath holds and do the holotropic stuff, and I slowed it down, and all of a sudden I was unable to actually hold my breath any longer. It was quite amazing, and I do put it down to the build-up of nitric oxide, and whether that's expanded the ventricles in the brain, and the sinus duct and the sinus cavity, and things have expanded there and allowed for something to shift. But yeah, I was no longer to hold the breath any longer. I just have created this wave pulse sensation that's just deep in my brain, in that I feel in that pineal pituitary area. But I feel this fluid moving. It's just like a wave, and it's beautiful, and some nice colours, and it's become more and more intense as the days and the weeks and the months drift by. I thought, wow, I probably need to share this practice with people.
Hmm.
But I no longer even have to take the rhythmic breath. I just now have to place my tongue at a certain position, create some suction, and really use some saliva and trigger or stimulate the breath movement from the perineum. and create a wave type breath. But yeah, in time, I don't necessarily have to breathe. I just have to give a little stimulation in the perineum, and or just a little bit of movement in the tongue, and now, yeah, the breath just breathes me. And I've heard you speak about that with one of your podcasts before, and you likened it, to a young baby that's when they fall asleep. I think you're even talking about your own child, and it just really resonated. And I thought that's what's happened. And some other information sort of dropped into my hands about the cosmic breath or embryonic breath. And yeah, it's there's weightlessness. You've also spoken about the tingling on the top of the fontanelle, and around, in the temples as well. And yeah, I get all that, and it's a lovely experience. So yeah, I just want to share that information. And I've designed something now that yeah, I feel that I can help others get to that place as well, whether we call it sacred secretion, or the microcosmic orbit, all these things I think are all entwined in it. So yeah, it's a breath practice that's become a non-negotiable daily ritual and ceremony that I look forward to. Yeah.
That's a that's quite profound. Very beautiful. Um, you obviously had a breathing practice prior to this. Did you have a meditation practice or you know, any mindfulness practice before getting into the breath?
Certainly I did. I've been practicing meditation for probably 12 or 15 years, not as strict as a discipline as certainly what I have now. Um, and even started, I designed some guided meditations quite some time ago that incorporated the breath, but not a rhythmic breath, you know. So certainly that, I'm one to exercise every day as well. So as much as I like to drop my heart rate down to, 42, 43, beats per minute, I also still get it up to 180, 190 quite regularly, lift weights, do body work activity, ground, spend time at the beach, earth under my feet, stargaze, ocean gaze, fire gaze, like all these types of things have always been a part of a healthy life that I've led. I like to sweat, I like to rinse the body out from the inside out. Um, so,
Awesome.
I complement, that mindfulness and that silent stillness and
Mhm,
space
mhm,
with the movement and
mhm.
exposure, and just immersing myself in beautiful nature. I'm lucky here in Australia that there's a lot of it around, and the weather's pretty good. So I can't. There's no excuse, Mauro. So yeah.
There's no excuse. There's no. So you talk about this rhythmic breathing. Now you're obviously, let's say, you're at the, in terms of if there is a quantifiable way here, you might be at the advanced level of this rhythmic breathing. Could you describe the actual technique to us, and then do you have recommendations of where you would actually recommend somebody start? Do you start where you're at right now in terms of doing that, or would you start with a different with a different technique?
Um, I probably wouldn't start where I'm at right now. It might be a little bit overwhelming. It's taken time to refine that breath and that technique. But now that I do have the technique, and certainly I can share it, because that's what I'm here to do, is to share. And I've realised that the most impact and the most constructive and productive way that I can help fellow humans is through the breath, and go back to doing what we did naturally. Lastly, when we're in the womb and when we entered the world. So, I mean, I touched on earlier that I did start the breath doing some, some Wim Hof stuff, some holotropic stuff. So I was doing a little bit more of that shallow, faster breathing, and even through the mouth, which I realised, probably wasn't the best of options. So I continued to do that type of breathing, but I was doing it through the nose and having the same effect. And yet my hands and fingers weren't going numb. As the health benefits that I've received from this as well has just been astronomical. I thought I was a fit, healthy man, and after a few months of doing the nasal breathing, I lost 8 or 9, 10 kilos, and I didn't know where that come from because I didn't change my exercise routine, I didn't change my diet, and I lost this weight quite easily. Haven't had a cough or a sniffle or a sneeze, for 4 or 5 years now. Recovery from any type of exercise or anything, stressful, which I don't have a lot of stress in my life, to be honest. It was just easy to overcome. So no, I would suggest that people, and I've designed this breath practice where of a baseline of 10 breaths per minute, all rhythmic. So I think that's the baseline, but people would need to find, what just slightly challenges them a little bit to start with. So, people could start at 10 or start at 8 breaths a minute. At 6 breaths a minute, you're looking at in for 4, out for 6 type scenario, and a little bit of a pause at the top and the bottom of the breath. And, as you build the strength and the respiratory system, the diaphragm, the abdominal wall, and the pelvic floor, well, you start to actually build a foundational base physically where you can sustain to breathe at those lower levels and starting to get down to 5 and 4 and 3.5 and 3. But yeah, now on a personal level, I've designed what's called a Fibonacci breathing series. So I think this morning I did an in for 13, out for 21 for an hour breath work, for 89 breaths. Which takes about an hour, and a nice, meditation or integration time to allow the body a new level of equalizing and homeostasis to be set. So no, I wouldn't recommend that you go straight to the top of the mountain because the fall can be quite hard. And that's why it's called progressive breathing, because it's a step-by-step process. And I find that there's a lot of people out there that are still looking for the quick fix and an immediate pleasure and instant gratification, or a little bit of a high. We've sort of been programmed to think that everything's at our fingertips, but it's like anything. If you want to master anything, it's like a martial arts practice or a yoga practice or a meditation practice. It's called a practice for a reason. You need to practice, and the results become very profound. So yeah, I touched on the technique. Just chime in if I've missed a part of your question there. Regarding the technique, I following a little bit of Qigong principles and ancient, Taoist stuff. It's, as you're probably aware, with the microcosmic orbit, we've got our governor and conception channel, and in Hindi, you've got the Ida and Pingala and Sushumna, and I think all these things are entwined and quite relative to each other, although they come from different traditions. But the breath starts at the perineum. For those that are not aware, that's the muscle in between the anus and the genitals, and that seems to be connected all the way up through the spine, through the major organs, to the tip of the tongue. And more than likely, connected to that pineal pituitary, whether that's through the Kachari or through some other areas. My knowledge of the physiology deep within the brain isn't quite, as where yours is, Mauro, or other people's, but the feeling I get that it is connected through the vagus nerve. And another name for the vagus nerve is the pneumogastric nerve, which in Greek means breath. So the whole nervous system can be regulated and controlled through the breath. And I honestly know that to be so. I don't believe it to be so anymore. I know it to be so. So that breath starts at the perineum. So it's a squeeze or a subtle lockdown of the perineum, followed by a pull in of the lower abdominals or the solar plexus, and then a lifting up into the lungs with the use of the diaphragm. So you're creating that wave breath. Now, this can also be controlled with the position of the tongue. So the position of the tongue is vital to the practice as well. So whereby the tongue is, on the roof of the mouth, just behind the top teeth. Lips obviously sealed, in Taoism with the microcosmic orbit or just the internal energy circuit of the body. To have that full circuit there's a meridian point on the top of the lips, there's a meridian point on the bottom of the lips. So if we go back to the microcosmic orbit with the governor channel, that starts at the perineum, runs up the back channel over the top of the head, finishes on the top of the lip, the conception channel from the perineum up the front to the bottom of the lip. So they also travel through, all those chakra or energy points in the body as well. So that energy circuit is always connected. And the other vital ingredient to this, I feel is the saliva, is the use of saliva, which can be used as a conduit for electromagnetic activity, and the tongue becomes quite like a magnet, and in time actually sits quite nicely on the roof of the mouth without any effort whatsoever with that use of saliva. But when I've got deeper into the breath itself, and as above so below, and I think what's happening down in those lower three chakras is also happening deep within the brain. And when we imitate or mimic the action of orgasm, so to speak, the muscles used in orgasm for both men and women. So that squeeze of the perineum and top of the pubic bone. At the same time, simultaneously, if you're creating a little bit of suction in the mouth, and pulling down on the back third of the top of the tongue, I think you actually get to stimulate the Kachari mudra. I know you've spoken about before, where I don't think I can't remember whether it was Brahmins used to slice the ligament of the tongue to try and push their tongue up further to be able to stimulate that area below the sinus cavity. So I don't believe you need to do that. I think the body is perfectly designed, and well, I know it's perfectly designed, and just creating that saliva and that suction at the same time that you squeeze the perineum. And you can literally, when your perineum, and when you've got that connection through the vagus nerve all the way down to the perineum as well, when you squeeze and imitate that action of the orgasm and using those muscles, you can feel your tongue wants to slide and glide. And that sliding and gliding along with the suction of the tongue starts to, what I feel is, stimulate the Kachari mudra, which is the yogic side of the breath practice. I think it comes from Kriya Yoga. Which actually stimulates that area, which is then connected to that pineal pituitary body. So then, and I also feel with the rhythmic and the nasal breathing as well, and I'd love to get one of the reasons that I wanted to have this conversation with you was the production of nitric oxide, and because what it feels like is it's expanding those ventricles in the brain and allowing for more production of CSF and for more flow. I've seen some of your videos where you've had a shot of the brain and an MRI, and you've shown what's happening with that pulsation, and that's exactly what's happening. And I think it's that connection of the microcosmic orbit with those other vital movements in those particular muscles. And as I said, as above, so below. And I think, if you're stimulating above and you're stimulating below at the same time, you've got this connection, and it's through that vagus nerve, and it's through the breath, through the pneumogastric nerve, and it goes all the way through the organs. And you start to get a vibration in the pubic bone, vibration in the brain. It starts to meet and converge in the center, which, the heart is potentially the rainbow bridge. So yeah, it's that's, I guess, the nuts and bolts of the technique. I do the technique laying down, and I mean, that was another question I had for you as well. Well, I wanted to pick your brains about the cerebrospinal fluid and the tidal type stuff. So I do the practice laying down. So I'm a firm believer that, all waters find level. So to actually get that flow, to actually be laying flat on the ground, and that allows for a better flow. We just have to look in nature, and with the way rivers and waterways flow is, of course, there's nothing flowing uphill. It's all trying to find the source and the lowest possible level that it can. So that, I guess, that's the pretty much most of it. You're welcome to prod me with a few questions and things like that. But I mean, all of this information I have, it's available on my website, and with the breath practice that I've designed, and it's the cornerstone of every breath. I practice a few different breaths. I'll do that somatic type breath work as well, but I do that through the nose. Obviously for protective mechanisms as well, and to prevent other things. But there's a double-edged sword for that. Yes, we can, release some old trauma in the body, but we also get a health benefit from it as well by strengthening up those muscles of respiratory system, diaphragm, abdominal wall, and pelvic floor, which is quite, we need that foundational strength as well. But yeah, so I'll hand it over to you. I could
Wow.
keep rattling on about the breath and the experiences, and it's my passion now, and it's, yeah.
That's
So
amazing. Yeah, I do
yeah.
have. I do have a few questions. One is, when you do the perineal hold, do you hold it for the entire breath, or do you hold it for the in breath, or do you hold it for the out breath, or do you release it at any point? Can you describe that a little bit more? Is there a relationship with the breath, or is it just you hold it for as long as you can? What is it how is the perineum brought into that? And then, what is, we're talking about the cerebrospinal fluid here, but what is it that you feel, number one, you say you feel this wave movement. What is that sensation for you? If you can describe it using words, and what makes you say that it's the cerebrospinal fluid? Because there seems like based on your experience in the practice, that there's a knowing that it's not somebody telling you or anything, that there's a deep knowing here. And so I'm curious, what is it that how is it that you feel the cerebrospinal fluid moving? And then, as a fluid system, do you have any thoughts on what this fluid wave is actually doing?
First, your first question about the length of the perineum squeeze, that has varied over the time. I'm not necessarily locking down on that lower base. All I'm trying to do is create a wave. Now, of course, when you get to the lower breaths, down to your 4, your 3, your 2.5, 2 breaths a minute, well, you're holding that squeeze a little bit longer because you're pulling down on it a little bit slower. But you're really trying to use It's more of a pump, a sacral pump, I probably term it. So you're using that to squeeze and to create a flow. So I'm not one to want to lock down on these energy centers in the body, because if you're locking down, you're creating resistance. You're not allowing the flow just to move. So it's more of a stimulation point. So it's a stimulation, and then you move it into the lower abdominals and you pull it up into the lungs. And the out breath is just the falling out. There's no effort on the out breath whatsoever. And the surplus air that isn't used in the out breath just naturally falls back into the stomach. So you're actually pulling that, both the energy and whatever air. So you're pulling through the stomach into the lungs and allowing it to fall back into the stomach, as opposed to breathing directly into the stomach. If you're breathing directly into the stomach, well, you're not creating the flow up into the lungs. Otherwise, well, what are the lungs for? They may as well not be there if you're just going to breathe into the lungs. And you're not using your diaphragm, and we know that the diaphragm really promotes moving that energy and pumping that blood back into the heart and creating that energy vortex within the heart so that can disperse out. So I feel it's very important that we actually pull that air through the stomach into the lungs and allow it to fall back into the stomach. So you literally, for the next breath, you're actually using what's there already in the stomach to pull back through. And the longer the air or the breath can actually stay in the body, the better opportunity there is for the absorption of all the nutrients that we need as well, and for the organs start to work in harmony together, and to rid themselves, of what is not needed, to get rid of the waste products, and really clean out, our vessel and our system, in a very productive, constructive way, because it's a little bit like a dance, and our body is much like a musical instrument. So when the organs start to breathe in rhythm and vibrate at a frequency, they work in harmony together. That's quite profound what they
Mhm.
do. Um, Now the second part of your question, which I'm just trying to tap back into, um, you might have to just remind me more, or if you can.
How do you have this sensation that it's that there's this connection with the cerebrospinal fluid in a wave that's being created? How do you feel that in the body? And there seems like there's this knowing that it's the cerebrospinal fluid. Um, you know, what is it what felt sense is informing you that this is definitely the fluid, and there's a knowing that, and then what is your connection with the cerebrospinal fluid beyond that? What do you think this wave is actually doing?
Well, I think ultimately it's flushing out the toxins in the brain first and foremost, but it's also stimulating, with. I'm aware that there's neurotransmitters and lots of cell salts, and probably and one thing I was going to ask you about was the electric and magnetic properties within the cerebrospinal fluid, because there's a vibration, like with, as I might have touched on earlier about the position of the tongue, but it becomes like a magnet, and it feels fluidic. Is that even a word? Fluidic? I'm not too sure.
It's
But I also had some sensations as well of, a dripping, from the middle of the brain down potentially through the brainstem, into the spine. And, I'm not claiming that I've had a Kundalini experience, but I've certainly had an experience when I was in a complete state of let go. And this is sometimes the trap, as you try and imitate things and force things a little bit. But, most things and most sensations have arisen, at a point of let go and absolute relaxation, where there is no forcing, there is no thinking. There is no ego. There is no being there. It's, a little bit like stepping out of the way and allowing it to do its thing. But, with I felt there was a fluid type snake just moving up the spine from that sacral area, through the solar plexus, through the heart, up through the throat. I even feel at times now I can pull that fluid up, into my brain, that I'm actually breathing directly into the midbrain, into that optical thalamus area, and it lights up. But the ventricles just, and I know they're the ventricles, and
Mm,
I think with I touched on the nitric oxide before, it expands, and it just brings me back to watching a wave at the ocean, where it's just curls up and crashes, curls up and crashes. And that's, the visuals and even the sound effects that I get. In fact, I've designed the breath to sound like a wave as well. So it's that movement of the fluid. It sometimes doesn't feel like a breath. It seems like I'm pulling a fluid through there. And then, of course, information in the past has come through about, the Christos or the oil, and, these types of different terminology. And there's different ways to describe it from different ancient traditions and things like that. But yeah, it feels tidal as
mm,
well.
mm.
If I'm breathing at different times of the day, and that's why I wanted to check in with you about how that relates to, our local tide times here, the ocean. Of course, we have, a high and low tide and two tides in between. And, I know from your amazing work that, the cerebrospinal fluid makes two trips a day. It descends twice and it ascends twice a day. I think that's right. So it's just a deeper knowing. Um, can I back it up can I prove it with evidence? Well, no, I can't. Of course I can't. You may be able to with your studies and things like that, Mauro, but I can't. It's a flow. It's a fluid. Our body is mostly fluid. About 67%, I think. Maybe more, depending on what we call a fluid. I even look at the fascia as being, liquid crystal, so to speak, and that holds some amazing, and or transfers information, connects the whole body. I liken that to the ether, the connective properties in the air. Um, we're breathing in electricity all the time. We're electromagnetically charged. Um, it just feels like a fluid. It feels like I'm breathing fluid at times, not necessarily air. It's a combination of the two. So I hope that partially answers your question. It's
I love
probably
it.
not.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And tell us, what is if somebody wanted to follow you or contact you, what is your website that people can look this information up on?
My website is progressivebreathing.com.
Okay.
Um, I've got quite a few blogs, a lot of information on there. I offer some different breath practices. I think I've got 4 different variations. It's all pre-recorded. All you have to do is press play and just follow the breath, to be fair. And for those that are curious enough, they will dive a little bit deeper into the technique instruction
Beautiful. Wow.
and everything that goes with. But I've got a reduction series that starts at 10 breaths per minute and drifts all the way down to 2 breaths a minute.
Okay.
Just follow the steps.
Hmm.
I've introduced some breath retentions in another series into the same type of format. I've got what I term as, which was my original idea, or concept, which was Fibonacci breathing, where that out breath is a little bit longer, of course, than the in breath. So it might be in for 3, out for 5, or in for 5, out for 8, in for 8, out for 13, in for 13, out for 21. I haven't expanded any further than that, but you're getting down to that, 1.8 breaths per minute. And it gets to a point where there's no effort is required to actually is draw the breath in, because you're
Yeah.
actually controlling it with your perineum and your tongue. It's just a squeeze and a movement, and it's like anything, you practice, and you start to align and tap into the body and what it needs and what it wants to do. So yeah, progressivebreathing.com. I've got a few social media handles. I'm not, overly adept at, keeping up to date with them, but the guts of it is on progressivebreathing.com. Yeah.
Wow, beautiful.
A little bit of
Yeah, yeah, no.
somatic and power breathing, double-edged sword with that one. Release some, do some healing and improve, your physical conditioning of your body at the same time, and
Hmm.
reduce the risks involved of tetany and stressing the body out. So, and a lot of what I do is I try to get people to mimic a sleep-like state, so we can go into different brainwave states
Mm.
and literally step out of the way and be
Hmm.
completely relaxed. I'm not a firm believer that forcing and huffing and puffing and creating a stress state, although it might elicit fluffy feeling for 15 or 20 seconds in the brain. But, I recall doing that when I was a child and spinning around 10 times and holding my breath and
We're
creating a
going
little bit of
past
blood
that.
pressure
Yeah, you're going
and getting
past
it.
that.
Is it a psychedelic experience, or is it the body's response to a little bit of stress and not getting what it needs? I don't know. That's, I appreciate everyone who's bringing any awareness to the breath and creating any healing modalities. I started there. You've sometimes got to go through to go beyond, and it's certainly still, valuable for those who feel the need for that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, wow. Well, thank you very much for sharing all that. That's really powerful. Again, progressivebreathing.com. You can find some of this information. Fibonacci breathing. Beautiful, beautiful work. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome, Mauro. I'm more than happy to share. That's what I'm here to do, is to share and express, and you know, to offer people the same opportunity.
Beautiful. Thank you.